On this episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast, we will be reviewing AEW Big Business and discussing the huge debut that came with it. We will also take an early look at the Wrestlemania 40 card, and we'll close out the show with a huge announcement regarding the future of this podcast. All that is headed your way right after this. If you're listening to the show on Google Podcasts, please note that the service is shutting down on April 2nd, 2024. The show will eventually go up on YouTube Music as a replacement, but in the meantime, please listen to the show on Deezer, Spotify, and YouTube. Back to the show. Well, hello and welcome back to the Marksville Wrestling Podcast, the home of positive pro wrestling content. Well, I wanted to start the show off here with a review of AEW Big Business, and like I mentioned in the intro, we're also going to be covering a big debut that came with it. Without spoiling anything too much in advance of getting to the actual card, I wanted to mention that this was booked basically in the same way that AEW Rampage The First Dance was. And when I say booked, I don't mean the card, I mean promoted. Promoted and kind of discussed on their programming, announced on their programming in a very similar way to AEW Rampage First Dance was. They're both big episodes of TV. They both had took place in a bigger stadium than AEW normally runs for its weekly television shows. And they both had hints. They were both telegraphed ahead of time. And they were both announced in sort of those special Tony Khan big announcements. So they were promoted in very similar ways. And I will say the cards on both shows were big and kind of special. There's a world title match here on Big Business. So, they're really trying to get eyes on it. And just as the debut of CM Punk was kind of telegraphed for The First Dance, so was the debut of an unnamed wrestler for AEW Big Business. And I will say, I'm sure you already know who that unnamed wrestler is, but we're going to go ahead and cover it right now. So, AEW Big Business took place live from TD Garden Wednesday, March 13th. And it looks like they had about 7,500 people in attendance around there. I'm not sure how proportional that is to regular episodes of Dynamite, but it sounds like a decent crowd to me. Obviously, TD Garden is traditionally a hockey and basketball arena, so it is usually set up for larger crowds than that. But, wrestling TV programs change the setup of a stadium. So I'm not sure how great that ticket number is for the size that they were working with. But it sounds like a good number to me. And, we hope that AEW can kind of bounce back here with not only its live event attendance, but also its viewership, just because it's had some issues in recent months with those things. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start the show. Now, no further ado here. I want to get right into what happened. I already telegraphed it, but Mercedes Moné, formerly known as Sasha Banks in WWE, did in fact debut here just as pretty much everyone thought she would. Even the logo of Big Business had cash symbols in it. It took place at the TD Garden, which is her home stadium because, she's from Boston. So it wouldn't really make sense if she wasn't here, to be honest. It's been all telegraphed and people more or less bought the tickets to see her. So I'm not sure what they would have done if she didn't sign with them. And they ran the show anyway. But regardless, she comes out, huge pop, of course. She actually has a new theme song, and she would, right? Because she's in a different promotion. So it's not like she's going to have her WWE theme. But it does appear that she has a manufactured AEW theme, because although I'm not sure what theme she had been using in NJPW, it is not that one here. So she's got a kind of gimmick within the theme, with the word CEO repeated a few times, and that just plays into her gimmick that is kind of like Ric Flair for a modern generation, all about the money, all about the big clothes, all about the Maybachs and cars. So it is kind of similar to the Ric Flair gimmick, but which wrestler isn't sort of derivative to Ric Flair at some level at this point? He's had such a lasting legacy that's just common to incorporate things of his gimmick into your gimmick. But regardless, CEO is going to be a new tagline for her, I'm sure, because everyone was already chanting it, even though they had just heard the theme for the first time. And that just shows how over she is, not only in AEW, but in the wrestling world in general. She comes out with an emotional promo thanking fans for sticking with her through the thick and thin. I think this mostly, obviously she's had a lot happen in her career, but a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, with the way she exited WWE and how no one really knew what was going on there. And we still don't entirely know what happened with that exit, but a lot of people had the back of her and Naomi when they walked out of WWE, and rightfully so. I mean, they left because of the booking, at least partially because of the booking of the AEW Women's Tag Division. Sorry, WWE Women's Tag Division, and a lot of people agreed with them, rightfully, because it was a pretty poorly booked division at that time. And I'm sure there was some other stuff behind the scenes that caused the exit. But a lot of people had her back, and I think she's thankful for that. She was trying to hold back tears, and being in your hometown, debuting for a new company in your hometown, especially, is some place that where it's not going to be easy to hold back tears. So, she had every right to do that, and I think it was just an impassioned debut promo. She does tease a feud with Willow Nightingale, who she ended up losing the NGPW Women's Strong Championship to because of an injury mid-match. They had to see them, calling an audible in which Monet actually lost to Nightingale. Nightingale becoming the NJPW Women's Strong Champion there. She's no longer the champion. It's been passed around a few times since. But obviously, if you get injured in the middle of a title match, you're going to feel like you were unjustly cheated out of it because you didn't have the chance to win. So they're going to play into that storyline, I'm sure, here. But Willow Nightingale's a babyface and Monet's debuting like a babyface. So we're going to see exactly how they choose to build and book that feud. We'll have to see. And I will say that Nightingale is kind of veering into heel territory here, what with Stokely Hathaway, but that seems like a very slow burn at this point. So I will say that Monet does show up later in the show, but I'm not going to get there because that's at the very end of the show. So we're going to go on next to what I mentioned earlier, which was the Wardlow and Samoa Joe title match. I mentioned there was a world heavyweight title match, and that's what it is. There was a vignette before the match where Adam Cole was reading a story about Wardlow's journey, and he was doing the story time with Adam Cole gimmick. And then they start the match. So I will say that I'm going to be honest. I expected Wardlow to actually win the title from Samoa Joe at a pay-per-view, probably Dynasty. And this kind of spits in the face of that. Now, they still have this stuff with Swerve Strickland and Adam Page in the background that they can definitely play into for the next world heavyweight title match. The ranking systems is back too, so you're going to have challengers in the same way that Daniel Garcia challenged Christian Cage. You might have an up and coming wrestler picking up wins to challenge Joe and ultimately lose at another pay-per-view. And something like that could definitely happen. I'm not sure, a Darby Allin, a Powerhouse Hobbs, someone like that, I think could make that happen. But regardless, and they would end up losing at that situation, I'm afraid, because I don't think anyone's going to be the new champion except for Swerve Strickland. And he might end up losing to Wardlow at some point because we do know Wardlow's waiting in the wings as well. But regardless, for this match right here, I was surprised they booked it on a television special. But again, it's to get the eyes on the product. It's to get the eyes on the debut of Mercedes Moné. And that's why they booked this title match here. But because it was on a TV special and because there was little to no build, I think we all expected the end result, which was Samoa Joe defending his title. Wardlow loses via the Kakina clutch, which is basically how Samoa Joe wins in pretty much every match at this point. And it's just become, one of those untouchable finishers, more or less. Not entirely, but it is definitely one of those finishers that you really do not ever see anyone escape. And when it's booked to fail, it's usually not received very well, right? That's one of the finishers you really want to protect, and they do pretty well with that, I would say, in AEW. But regardless, Samoa Joe defeats Wardlow, retaining his World Heavyweight Championship, and we're gonna see how and when and where and all that sort of stuff when Wardlow gets back into the title picture. I'm not sure how. The way they're building the Undisputed Kingdom, there's already tag team titles and there's already an international title. And that was basically 2/3 of the promise that the Undisputed Kingdom when they introduced themselves. And that's already fulfilled. 2/3 is already fulfilled. And now Wardlow has not fulfilled his end of the bargain by winning the world title. So we're going to see how that plays. It could very likely be a heel feud against Adam Cole. And when I say heel feud, I mean Cole would be the heel, and Wardlow would actually likely be the babyface in the situation, because the whole point of Wardlow winning the title was that he was going to just hand it over to Adam Cole, and he's the heel leader of the faction. So naturally, if Wardlow kind of gets punished and bullied as a result of losing this match, I don't see why he wouldn't be the babyface and maybe end up breaking up from the Undisputed Kingdom. Or maybe what they'll do is they'll just have a couple different title changes happen. Samoa Joe loses to Swerve Strickland or whoever the next winner is. And then Wardlow dethrones them, right? Maybe he'll just climb his way back up the card and continue the storyline for Undisputed Kingdom. But it does feel like because he's failed to win it here, there might be a sort of change in momentum to that storyline. But enough time spent on that. The Elite, that is the Young Bucks and Kazuchika Okada, who they called the best wrestler alive, taking on Eddie Kingston, Penta L0M, and Pac. Pac is back, and I know some people call him Pac, but regardless, he is back here. And they really did not build up his return that much, but I know that had been a while since he was back in AEW, so a lot of people were waiting for him to return, and I definitely was too. So he was injured. We still haven't seen Rey Fenix come back, so we don't have the full Death Triangle yet. But Eddie Kingston has been known to team up with the Lucha Brothers multiple times. So yeah, and then there's just a good trios match here. Wanted to mention, of course, that the Young Bucks are really Matthew and Nicholas Jackson at that point, because that's what they're going by. But they actually lead the match with a promo where they have Okada with them, and they hype him up big time. And then obviously there's giant pyro and the big grandiose entrances for the Elite as they play into their kind of conceited heel personas. And I shouldn't say kind of conceited, I should say very conceited heel personas. And then we had the other three. I would say in this case they're the babyface trio. The babyface trio came out. But Okada actually ends up winning for his team by getting the Rainmaker on Eddie Kingston. But I should mention that this Rainmaker actually came after a low blow, so it was a tainted victory. But that's what the Elite are going to be doing right now, right? They are going to be playing into their heel stuff as much as they possibly can and just building it up as much as they possibly can. And they want that momentum. They want that heel momentum going into their storyline. Wherever that storyline takes them, I'm not sure. Maybe it leads to somehow a return of Kenny Omega. But regardless, they end up winning that match. The Elite do. Like I said, via a low blow and then a Rainmaker onto Eddie Kingston. Next up, we have a promo from Will Ospreay, who is building up his match against Bryan Danielson. He is obviously a huge deal signing for AEW, but it kind of feels like he's been in the background only because of Okada's recent signing and then because of Mercedes Moné's recent signing. And AEW is really doing all they can going into the new year to just, get eyes on the product and make everything, popular and make sure everyone can get behind it. And I will say that the promo was spirited, and he wants to restore the feeling to AEW because a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, feel that AEW's kind of gone downhill recently, and he wants to help aid in its return. Um, but yeah, I would say that the storyline wasn't super, maintained here. The storyline wasn't really progressed. It was more of just a beef between him and Bryan Danielson, and there's nothing wrong with that. They do wrestle as kind of classical, technical wrestlers, so it makes sense that they would build it kind of as a beef, a blow off to a beef rather than a kind of storyline with a lot of, twists and turns and sort of just creative writing. It makes more sense that they would kind of do just a one on one man versus man sort of beef in the way that, BCC, a lot of their matches are booked like that. And, it makes sense. I don't know if it's necessarily my cup of tea, only because I love goofy, over the top wrestling storylines. Um, but regardless, this was still a good promo for what it was. And it's going to be a great match. Like I said, a dream match between him and Danielson that will be over at Dynasty, which is taking place in April in St. Louis. And again, that's the debut of that pay per view, which I did mention in one of my prior episodes, just because there are so many announcements in AEW. I felt like I wanted to announce the arrival of a new pay per view. So, anyway, Ospreay's going to take on Danielson, likely in the main event of that card. And they continue to build to it here. Now we have Jay White taking on Darby Allin. And this is basically kind of building into two things. It's building into one, Jay White and the Gun Club and their feud with the Acclaimed, because of them being together previously in the Bang Bang Scissor Gang. But what ends up happening is that they actually did, rough up the Acclaimed, and they're no longer friends anymore. That faction is no longer together anymore. And, Bullet Club Gold is back on their own, and the Acclaimed are back on their own. But they are likely going to have some run ins here just because of the recency of the breakup of that group. So yeah, Jay White takes on Darby Allin. Obviously, big heel here. I should mention that Darby Allin is going to actually climb Mount Everest, so he will be absent from AEW programming for a little while. I'm not sure when that is, but this one is going to be one of his last few matches before he takes that hiatus. And yeah, so Jay White actually ends up winning the match. Darby Allin tries a coffin drop, but lands on the apron, selling his injuries, and Jay White picks up the win. Bullet Club Gold, they turn on the Acclaimed right here. And basically what the Acclaimed tried to do was try to make peace because they had some kind of, beef going on within the group. But Bullet Club Gold just go straight heel and say, hey, no more Bang Bang Scissor Gang. And that's the end of that faction, which had a pretty short timeline, pretty short existence in AEW. And I'm not sure that I can say I expected that. Now, I will say I don't think that the Bang Bang Scissor Gang necessarily had a lot to offer in terms of storyline. I mean, they're a very entertaining group, but they weren't really getting booked for anything storyline related. Nothing you could really sink your teeth into. So I think they kind of just said, hey, we got to give something. We got to give something, and we have to inject a little bit of life into the storyline. So they decided to just break it up. And I don't see anything wrong with that. But we're going to have to see how the feud between the two trios progresses. And we're going to see if the Acclaimed actually lose their trios belts to Bullet Club Gold, which I think is very likely, I would say. So yeah, regardless, Jay White picks up the win against Darby Allin. I don't really want to cover Chris Jericho and his, basically fatigue during the match and his poor reception by the crowd, getting boos and all that stuff, just because of the sort of situation he's been in. And like I say at the beginning of every show, this is the most positive pro wrestling podcast you're going to find. So I don't want to dwell on those things. But it was a tag match where Chris Jericho and Hook are together right now. Chris Jericho's kind of acting like his old Lionheart gimmick, using his music for that. And then they actually end up defeating the Gates of Agony. So that's Khan and Toa from the embassy, Mogul Embassy. And yeah, so Lion Hook is what they're going by. Actually, take the win there, and not going to spend too much time on it. But yeah, it's building into the continued sort of Jericho and Hook storyline, because what happens after the match is that Jericho challenges Hook to a FTW title opportunity. So we're gonna see how that goes. And yeah, then we actually get into the main event, which I will say, I'm not sure if many people watching the show expected it to be the main event. I think most people expected the title match, or at least I expected the title match to be the main event of this card. Yeah, I think Wardlow versus Samoa Joe makes sense, but AEW needs to do a really good job about getting their women's division more exposure, more time on the card. And they have a lot of ground to cover because of how poor they've been at booking it recently. So I think that this was the right decision by booking a female main event, which I still haven't gotten to yet. But they need to do this more often, and they need to book them better and spend more time on the division overall. So regardless, Willow Nightingale actually defeats Riho here in the main event of AEW Big Business. And I'm sure you can tell why Willow Nightingale was in the main event. It's so that you can end the main event segment with, you guessed it, Mercedes Moné. Basically, how she ends up getting involved is that Nightingale wins the match with a Dr. Bomb, and then Julia Hart and Sky Blue show up attacking Nightingale after the match, because they do have some beef with Willow Nightingale and Chris Statlander. And surprisingly, Nightingale, who is aligned with Chris Statlander right now, um, you know, I'm not sure exactly where that storyline's going, because Willow Nightingale was on her own here. Chris Statlander wasn't there. Stokely Hathaway wasn't there. So ends up forcing Mercedes Moné to come out and make the save, getting the heels out of the way by hitting Julia Hart with her modified gory special. And yeah, and that obviously we know why they did that, right? It builds the feud between Mercedes Moné and Willow Nightingale, and we all, think that's a good idea. But again, I do think it's a little strange that they did not have anyone that Willow Nightingale is currently involved with and aligned with, actually on the show here and at the end of the card here, just because it doesn't really make logical sense for Willow Nightingale to be getting beat up, and then her tag partner, basically Chris Statlander, to not show up at all. That doesn't really make sense. But regardless, they did it so that they could have Mercedes Moné, get involved in the feud with Nightingale, and that's why they did it, and it makes sense. But I do think there's a little questionability there, and just why exactly wasn't Chris Statlander there? Why wasn't Stokely Hathaway there? I'm just not sure really what Willow Nightingale's going to do going forward, other than we know now, taking on Mercedes Moné sometime in the future. But I'm not sure really what's going to happen with her character. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, they're both baby faces right now. So we're going to have to see who turns heel. And, look, neither of them might turn heel. It might be a babyface versus babyface feud. But generally, you have to have a foil. You have to have at least a tweener taking on a babyface. So we're gonna have to see what they do with those two women, and if they end up turning either of them heel as they go into their feud, which I would say is actually going to culminate at a later pay-per-view. I don't think they'll fight at AEW Dynasty, but I could stand corrected. Or maybe they will fight at Dynasty, and it'll be a sort of one in a series of matches. But yeah, regardless, we'll have to see how that goes. Pretty solid AEW episode here. Episode of AEW Dynamite. Obviously, it was a special, like I said, but I think it's pretty good, solid show. I'd say the low spots here are really, Chris Jericho continuing to kind of feel stale to a lot of AEW fans right now with his controversies and whatnot. And then I would also say that the Bullet Club Gold and Acclaimed segment was a little disappointing, only because the fact that that faction fizzled out so quickly without really anything in the way of storyline is a little disappointing. If they're able to salvage it, like I said, with a good feud, then I will be eat my words. But right now, I just don't think it looks like a great decision, because why would you build up a faction over a month and then have them exist for about 2 weeks only to go away? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But like I said, if they get the feud right, then I'll be eating my words. And yeah, I'd say those are the only two low spots on the show. Everything else was pretty good. Solid AEW programming if you are into it. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into the next segment of the show right after this. The Marksville Wrestling Podcast is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling is where you can find the podcast early before it drops on other platforms, and it is also the home of exclusive behind-the-scenes content, Q&As, and more. If you like the show and would like to support it, please consider doing so on Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling. Thanks for the support, and back to the show. Welcome back. We're going to go ahead and look at the Wrestlemania 40 match card as it stands right now. So far, only 9 matches announced. We do know the nights that 3 of those matches will be taking place, which I think is a big deal. This show is about 3 weeks away at this point. So the fact that already 9 matches have been announced, I think is kind of a big deal. But yeah, I wanted to sort of just look at the card as it stands. I did get this inspiration from Steve here at the YouTube channel Russell Juice. He's also known for his podcast, Going in Raw with Steven Larson. But he actually did predictions for the 9 matches that were announced on this card so far. And I just thought that was interesting as we get into WrestleMania season full force. I just thought that that would be a good thing to do. And it would also lead into an announcement, like I said, that's coming at the end of the show. But I don't want to spoil that here, but we're just going to go ahead and cover the WrestleMania match card as it stands today. I am recording this on Sunday, March 17th. So it's very likely that on this coming week's episode of Raw and SmackDown, there could be more matches involved. And we will have definitely more participants in that 6-pack tag match involved as well, because they're going to hold the qualifiers for that match coming up here. So those will at least be announced. I'm not sure how many other matches will be added to the card this week, but we shall see. Maybe none, but again, it is 3 weeks away, so they got to start building and adding matches to the card. So without further ado, let's look at what they have booked now. Obviously, WrestleMania 40 is taking place at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, the home of the Eagles, between April 6th and April 7th, because WrestleMania is now a 2-day event, as it has been since 2020. And yeah, we actually already have 9 matches announced, like I said. So let's go ahead and take a look at them. The big money matches here are The Rock and Roman Reigns taking on Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins to determine a stipulation for the undisputed WWE Universal Championship match. They kind of stopped using the heavyweight word in WWE, and I'm still getting used to that just because of, the way that word gets used for every title in boxing, UFC, and other wrestling companies. So I'm still getting used to the fact that they don't have that here. But regardless, it is for the WWE Universal Championship match. It'll be Cody against Roman. So what they're doing is they're picking the stipulation here via this tag match. So basically, if The Rock and Roman win, they get to decide what the special stipulation is for the Universal Championship match. And if Cody and Seth win, they get to do the same. So I would just say real quick that I think a stipulation match is really going to play into the hands of the bloodline. And you want to sow doubt into the fans. You want to create the sort of idea that Roman is going to retain against Cody. And I do greatly hope that Roman doesn't retain against Cody, but you want to at least keep building and make it look like he will, because that builds drama and that makes everybody sort of get even more involved emotionally into the match, because everyone was so emotionally involved in the last time Roman and Cody fought for the title and Cody came up short, that they want to have that same sort of environment and emotion behind this match as well, because I think this time Cody will eventually win, and that'll change the way people's emotional investment kind of pays off here. But anyway, so we're gonna have that match, and I would say generally for my prediction, I think The Rock and the Roman Reigns are likely to pick up the win. And then they're gonna sort of choose a heelish stipulation for Cody's title opportunity. And I think that that makes a lot of sense booking wise. I think it also makes sense booking wise for Cody and Seth to pick up the win. But we're gonna just have to see. And I mean, I don't think there's a wrong choice, but I just think that the Rock and Roman winning would give a lot of heel momentum, going into the title match. And I think that that's better for, just booking in general. I think it's a better storyline decision. But yeah, we'll have to see. And then, of course, we'll have to see what the stipulation ends up being, right? Because if The Rock and Roman win, it's going to be a whole lot different, likely, than what Cody and Seth choose as the stipulation. Cody and Seth, if they win, they might choose a stipulation that would play into Cody's hand, right? Really good with he's good in pretty much every environment, but he, is infamous for that match he had with Seth with the torn pectoral in a cage. So who knows? Maybe they would choose to have it in a cage. Maybe they would choose to have a no DQ match. I'm not really sure. Whatever can play into Cody's strengths, and maybe just even something as a no bloodline interference match or a shark cage match. I don't think that would be the right decision for this card, but who knows? Something like that, something barring any sort of heel interference from occurring on the show for the main event. So regardless, we're gonna go ahead and get into my prediction for the actual title match, which is Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes for the undisputed WWE Universal Championship match. I do think that Cody wins here. I mean, I don't know what else they would do, frankly. Now, if The Rock and Roman win the aforementioned match, and they do choose a stipulation that plays into Roman's strengths, maybe there's a sort of interference involved and stuff, then yeah, Roman has a better chance of winning, but I really don't think it's going to allow him to win. I think Cody is going to win. He's got all the momentum behind it. And look, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So if they do have Roman winning, after all, I really thought he was going to lose the first time. So if they have Roman win and retain after all, then I'm not sure what that says about not only Cody, but about the card in general. I mean, I just think that's going to send. If everyone was upset when Roman won the first time in WrestleMania 39, then wow, you are not going to like, WWE would not like seeing what happened in Philly, especially with how raucous and notorious Philly fans are in sports. So, yeah, I don't think they make that mistake again. But a lot of people don't see it as a mistake. A lot of people see it as a long-term booking opportunity that got them to this point in the first place, that allowed them to have a big money rematch. And that's a very good point, but I still do think that they should have had Cody win the first time. And, we're going to have to see if he can pull it off here, but I really do think he does. Then we have the World Heavyweight Championship match. I get to use that word this time, the heavyweight. Seth Rollins takes on Drew McIntyre to try to retain the title. I'm actually going to say Drew wins here. Super huge character renaissance for Drew McIntyre. Kind of, brought his career back in the way that Christian Cage did is with AEW, and just his over the top, incredible heel work. I think Drew McIntyre is doing similar work there too. And I think it would be almost foolish to have Seth retain, not because of anything Seth is doing wrong. He's obviously on top of the world and, maintaining his great in-ring abilities right now. But I do think that Drew I think it's just his moment and his kind of revenge tour where he, this revenge tour that has to do with him being a babyface who won the title, and it was supposed to be his big crowning moment, but it happened during COVID and no one was there to see it. Obviously, we were there to see it on TV, but no one was there to see it live, and it obviously didn't have any near the same impact that we wanted it to. So I think Drew winning here is going to continue his revenge tour where he's like, oh, I couldn't win the title for you. Now I'm going to win the title to spite you. And I'm saying in regards to the fans, I couldn't win the title for you because none of you were there. So now I'm gonna, win it to spite you. And obviously it's a different title, but the landscape has changed so dramatically that I think it'll still hit the same way. Anyway, I think Drew wins here, but we'll have to see. I mean, I think it could go either way. Seth could definitely retain, and I don't think there'd be as big an issue with that as if Roman retained, for example. But I do think they should have Drew win here just to maintain his, current heel character and momentum. Next up is the WWE Women's Championship match, where Io Sky will retain against Bayley. I don't think she'll successfully retain, though. I think Bayley picks up the win here. Um, Obviously, Bayley getting ousted from Damage Control, which was the stable she founded. And Io Sky is basically the de facto leader now with her women's, championship. I do think that Asuka and Kairi Sane and the Kabuki Warriors, they're tag champs, women's tag champs, or they were. I'm not sure if they are anymore, just because I haven't been completely up to date with, WWE programming. But they were tag champs, and they're that faction just looks super dominant. And the whole point there, building Damage Control up the way they are, is to make it look like basically Damage Control never needed Bayley after all, and that Bayley was basically a liability. And it's a very heel flip, right? The faction flipped heel, and it was originally a babyface faction with Bayley, but it is basically just kind of transformed over time. And now we have the old leader versus the original leader. And I do really think Bayley's going to pick up the win here in what's going to be a huge babyface crowning moment. And we'll see if we'll see what happens with Dakota Kai, because unlike the rest of Damage Control, who is firmly behind Io Sky, Dakota Kai has gone kind of back and forth, teasing friendship with Bayley, but she is back with Damage Control right now. But we'll have to see what happens. It could all be a ruse, and she could end up helping Bayley out on that title match. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But I do think Bayley picks up the win here, and I don't think it'd make a lot of sense if she did it. Next up, we have the Women's World Championship match, which is Rhea Ripley retaining against Becky Lynch. And again, I do think that this one's a pretty foregone conclusion, just like the Io Sky and Bayley match, where Rhea Ripley's going to retain. And, in this case, the champion won't retain because, sorry. In the case of the Io Sky versus Bayley match, the champion won't retain, but the women's world champion will retain. Rhea Ripley, is going to defeat Becky Lynch. I'm pretty confident. I'd be very surprised if she did not. And I just think that, again, it's a booking decision that makes sense. Sometimes you got to make things unpredictable, but some things you have to play safe too, right? And I think Rhea Ripley defeating Becky Lynch is playing it safe, but I think it's the right decision. I don't see what else would make sense. Becky Lynch had her time in the sun, and she's still got plenty in her, don't get me wrong. She's likely going to hold a title again very soon. I would be very surprised if she didn't. But she was the NXT Women's Champion, and she had that run come to an end. And I think it's just Rhea's moment to continue being dominant. And I think Rhea Ripley could very well, break some new records with her Women's World Championship reign. She's so over right now, not just in Australia, but everywhere. And she's also pretty much being booked as the face of the company at this point. And it's with good reason. She's really over, and she's a great wrestler. She's a great talent. And I think that her reign is going to be monstrous. WWE Intercontinental Championship match. Gunther will defend against Sami Zayn. A lot of people wanted Chad Gable to win the qualifying match and take on Gunther. But Sami Zayn's obviously gonna take this match and make it gold like he usually does. Not that he'll have to pull a lot of weight here, because Gunther takes everything he's given and makes gold out of it as well. But I will say that those two guys together is just gonna make it even better of a match. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be incredible, I would say. I mean, unless it isn't, right? I could be very wrong. Maybe someone has an off night, but these guys are both very accomplished and very talented wrestlers. So on paper, this is probably a match of the night candidate. I think it could steal the whole show if they're given enough time, if the pacing is done well. I'm not sure if there'll be anything in the way of interference. Um, but yeah, I do think that this could seal the show, and it very likely will, but who knows? We'll have to see when it actually comes. I do think Gunter retains, I should mention. And Sami Zayn is, he deserves a title, right? He's been a huge name in the company for a long time, but I don't think him losing is going to devalue him at all. I don't think it's going to make his stock go down. I think he's pretty much as over as you can be. As a veteran in WWE, he's got such a popular history in the company, and so many people love him that I really don't think this is going to hurt him at all. But yeah, I do think Gunther retains. And then we have the WWE United States Championship match. So the other mid card title has been announced. Other men's mid card title has been announced for this show. Logan Paul in a triple threat will be trying to retain against Randy Orton and Kevin Owens. Now this one's hard to predict for me because Kevin Owens has had his feud with Logan Paul, and it did kind of feel like they were building to a Kevin Owens babyface win at WrestleMania. But now you have Randy Orton involved, and that muddies the waters a little bit. And I don't think Randy Orton's going to win at all. I do think he's just kind of there to add excitement and, intrigue to the match. And as obviously he's a great wrestler, so he's going to add great wrestling to the match. But I do think that Logan Paul, having Randy Orton there in addition to Kevin Owens, is actually going to allow him to retain. And I do think Logan Paul will pull off the upset here. I would say it's an upset if you're facing people like Randy Orton and Kevin Owens in a triple threat. It's probably lucky if you come out alive. But yeah, I do think Logan Paul's going to win, probably through some underhanded heel tactics, and that's going to allow him to retain. And I do think that they might keep dragging this Logan Paul and Kevin Owens feud through to possibly SummerSlam or WrestleMania Backlash if they have that show this year. They usually do, but sometimes they've gone without Backlash. Anyway, I do think that Logan Paul wins here, and I think he retains. Next up, we have the six-pack ladder match for the undisputed WWE Tag Team Championships. This was the one I mentioned earlier where we don't have all entrants announced yet because there are going to be qualifying matches taking place on TV to determine that. But Finn Balor and Damian Priest are the current undisputed WWE Tag Team Champions, and as a result, they will be looking to retain. It is a six-pack match, which means there are 6 tag teams involved and 12 people total. There's going to be a huge fight, a lot of men in the ring, and it is a ladder match, so there's going to be a lot of high spots, a lot of crazy stuff. I'd be surprised if they gave this match anything less than 20 minutes, just because of how many people are involved. And I do think Judgment Day could give up the belts here, but it really depends on who's in the match. DIY is somebody that Steve mentioned on his video on Wrestle Juice again. The DIY is a team he mentioned that could possibly dethrone Judgment Day. Personally, I don't see that happening. I think it's possible, but I don't see it happening. We're gonna have to see who's in this match before I can firmly give it a prediction. But I will say that Rhea with her title, Damian Priest with his Money in the Bank briefcase, I think it takes a lot of steam out of Judgment Day for them to lose the belts here. So I'm just going to err on the side of caution and say, hey, they probably retain. But again, I'm not sure who they're fighting against. If there's a lot of teams that I think have a lot, of opportunities to win the belts, then it might go the other way. I really am not sure what'll happen here, just because ladder matches can be really unpredictable. And with how many competitors are in this match, the odds are definitely going to be against the Judgment Day. But preliminarily, I would say they retain just for storyline reasons alone. I think it makes Finn and Damian look really weak and lame if they lose their belts and Rhea doesn't, and she's the leader. But look, that could be a feud too, right? They could lose here, and that could just serve storyline purposes. So regardless, I think they'll retain, but we're going to have to see who is in it before I give a firm prediction later on. I should mention that I will have a full card prediction when we get there. But now we got Jey Uso versus Jimmy Uso in the end of the bloodline feud, pretty much. I'm not saying it's the end of the bloodline. I'm just saying it's the end of the Jay versus Jimmy bloodline feud. It's very possible that this isn't even the end of their series. I just think it should be. I think it should be where Jay wins, Jimmy embraces him, they make up, they, kind of come to an understanding. Maybe they're back in the tag division as baby faces again. But I think Jay wins. He has to pick up the win here, right? Main event Jay Uso has to mean something at some point. And I think he ends up taking the win against his brother here. But again, I don't know that this will be the end of their feud. I just think for storyline purposes, similar to with the Judgment Day stuff, storyline purposes and continuity, I do think they should win. They should end the feud here, and I do think Jay should win. But we'll see. We'll see what happens, and that could be a match that a feud that drags on to SummerSlam, and I don't think that'd be bad. They just have to book it right. Finally, here, the last match announced is LA Knight and AJ Styles. And look, I don't have much to say about this match. I know both of these guys are very capable singles wrestlers, both over with the crowd. But in the way of storyline, I'm not really sure what they've been building, and I don't know if we have a great reason to be invested in it right now, other than it's going to be a great match. But we will see later on through TV how they build that match. And without further ado, I'm going to pause here. And after a quick break, we're going to have our big announcement to end the show right after this. Well, that is going to about do it for this episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. But before I go, I wanted to give the big announcement that I mentioned at the top of the show, which is that I will be attending Wrestlemania 40 live from Philadelphia. And I will, as a result, have plenty of content to provide you with for that show. There will be content going up on my YouTube page and my Instagram page. You can expect me to experiment with YouTube Shorts for the first time, and you can expect all sorts of content. Just pictures from the area, pictures from Philadelphia itself, pictures of wrestlers from WrestleCon, pictures of the Wrestlemania set, things like that. You can expect short form content videos of maybe my seat view from WrestleMania, things like that. Maybe I'll even have a chance to interview some folks outside of the arena in Lincoln Financial Field. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to end the show here, but please keep an eye out for WrestleMania weekend content happening at Marksville Wrestling on Instagram and at Marksville Wrestling on YouTube. Also at Marksville Wrestling at mastodonsocial.com. And there will be some going live on the Patreon as well that you will not be able to find anywhere else. So keep it locked into patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling for that exclusive content. And that has been the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. I am Owen, as always. Please take care, and I will talk to you next time.